European Space Agency satellites monitor everything: crop yields, urban expansion, climate patterns. They are not designed to detect the impossible. But at 6:15 UTC on January 30th, thermal imaging satellites registered an anomaly that made mission control contact emergency services across 3 countries. Simultaneous ground temperature spikes appeared along Mediterranean coastlines. Not volcanic, not seismic, something else entirely. Within hours, the mystery revealed itself in the most dramatic way possible. In Sicily, 4 kilometers of cliff face plunged into the sea, exposing underground clay layers that were generating heat as they shifted and compressed. The satellite had detected not just Neshemi's collapse, it had captured the thermal signature of ancient geological processes activating across the entire Mediterranean basin. Analysis of the thermal data uncovered a pattern that rewrites coastal geology textbooks. Mediterranean cities are not just built on unstable ground, they are built on interconnected geological systems that respond to each other across vast distances. When pressure releases in Sicily, fault stress redistributes to Spain. When Greek coastlines shift, Italian foundations adjust. The satellites revealed something even more disturbing: thermal signatures indicating underground movement beneath 47 different Mediterranean coastal cities, all showing the same 30-year cyclical activation patterns that preceded Neshemi's collapse. So if European satellites can detect geological instability before cliffs collapse, why are the same thermal signatures now appearing beneath some of the Mediterranean's most populated coastlines? And what happens when an interconnected geological network spanning 3 continents reaches its critical pressure point simultaneously? To understand the true threat lurking beneath the Mediterranean, we need to turn to the experts. Dr. Elena Rossi of the Italian National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology has spent 12 years studying coastal instability in this region. She has mapped fault lines, analysed soil samples, and monitored ground movement across southern Italy. But she has never seen thermal satellite data like January 30th. The heat signatures showed coordinated geological activity across 2,000 kilometres of coastline, she explains, pointing to ESA thermal maps that look more like a synchronized light show than random geological processes. You see, the Mediterranean Sea is essentially a geological accident, the remnant of an ancient ocean called Tethys that was slowly crushed between colliding continents over millions of years. As Africa pushed northward into Europe, massive layers of marine sediments were compressed, uplifted, and folded into the landscapes we see today. These sediments, primarily clay-rich deposits from ancient seabeds, form the foundation beneath most Mediterranean coastal cities. Unlike stable bedrock, these marine clays have unique properties. They expand when wet, contract when dry, and become unstable under specific pressure and saturation conditions. Essentially, the Mediterranean's most beautiful coastal towns are built on compressed ancient seafloor that never forgot it used to be underwater. That lingering geological memory helps explain why coastal stability can change so suddenly. Church records from Neshemi date back to 1693, and they tell a disturbing story. Every generation mentions the same disaster. The cliff gave way, houses fell to the sea, families fled the collapsing ground. The intervals are remarkably consistent. Major collapses occurred in 1729, 1758, 1789, 1818, 1847, 1876, 1905, 1934, 1967, 1997, and now 2026. Father Giuseppe Cantone, curator of Neshemi's historical archives, has traced the pattern across 3 centuries. He says our ancestors rebuilt in the same places because they had no choice. The fertile soil, the harbour access, the defensive position, everything depended on living on the cliff. They just accepted that every 30 years part of the town would disappear. But what killed dozens in previous centuries could now kill thousands. Nisemi's population has grown from 3,000 in 1900 to 25,000 today. Multi-storey apartment buildings replace single-storey stone houses. Underground utilities create rigid infrastructure that can't flex with ground movement. Most critically, evacuation routes that once led to nearby hills now lead through urban bottlenecks that could trap fleeing residents. According to Dr. Marco Bianchi of the University of Palermo, we have built modern cities on ancient geological clocks, but we have forgotten how to read the time. So what makes these cliffs so predictably unstable? Beneath Nisemi lies a geological masterpiece of natural engineering, alternating layers of marine clay and sandy sediments deposited over thousands of years. Each layer responds differently to water, sand drains quickly, clay retains moisture for decades. This creates a natural timing mechanism where groundwater cycles through the layers in precisely predictable intervals. Dr. Alessandro Vitale, a hydrogeologist at the Mediterranean Institute of Technology, explains the process. Picture a sponge made of different materials. Some sections absorb water immediately, others hold it for years. When the clay layers finally saturate to capacity, they lose structural integrity within days. Research reveals that Nisemi's clay foundations operate on a complex hydrological schedule. Rainwater percolates through upper soil layers relatively quickly, but when it reaches the deeper clay strata, movement slows dramatically. It takes approximately 25 to 30 years for groundwater to fully saturate the clay layers that support the cliff structure. Once saturation reaches critical levels, the clay begins to behave like a liquid rather than a solid foundation. Surface structures that have seemed stable for decades suddenly find themselves supported by geological quicksand. The process is predictable, measurable, and utterly unstoppable. But January's collapse violated the established timeline. The last major failure occurred in 1997, only 29 years ago, not the full 30-year cycle. More disturbing, the scale of collapse was unprecedented. 4 kilometers of cliff face versus the typical 1 to 2 kilometers of previous events. Preliminary analysis suggests Cyclone Harry accelerated the saturation process by dumping 3 months' worth of rainfall in 72 hours. Instead of gradual groundwater infiltration, the clay layers experienced shock saturation that compressed the normal timeline into days rather than years. Satellite thermal imaging revealed why January's collapse was different. As clay layers rapidly saturated and destabilized, friction from underground movements generated measurable heat signatures. The thermal energy release was equivalent to the geological stress of a magnitude 4.5 earthquake, but spread horizontally rather than vertically. More alarming, similar thermal signatures appeared simultaneously across Mediterranean coastlines from Spain to Turkey. Coastal monitoring stations detected ground temperature spikes in locations with identical geological profiles to Nisemi, suggesting that Cyclone Harry's effects extended far beyond Sicily. Recent analysis of historical records reveals a disturbing trend. The 30-year cycle is shortening. Collapses that occurred every 32 to 35 years in the 1800s now happen every 28 to 30 years. Climate data suggests increasing precipitation intensity is accelerating groundwater saturation rates across the region. Dr. Rossi warns that we are not just dealing with predictable geological clocks, we are watching those clocks speed up in real time. Nisemi's collapse may represent just one falling domino in a much larger pattern. The Mediterranean basin contains some of the world's most extensive marine clay deposits, the compressed remains of ancient ocean floors that stretched from Spain to the Middle East. These deposits do not respect modern national borders. They form continuous geological layers beneath coastal cities across multiple countries. Recent deep core drilling projects coordinated by the European Geological Survey have mapped these clay layers with unprecedented precision. The results reveal a startling truth. Cities separated by thousands of kilometers sit on virtually identical geological foundations, all subject to the same saturation cycles and instability patterns. When Niskayme's cliff collapsed on January the 30th, the event did not occur in geological isolation. Underground, the sudden pressure release sent shockwaves through interconnected clay layers that extend beneath much of southern Italy. Think of it as squeezing one end of a water balloon. The pressure redistributes throughout the entire system. Dr. Andreas Müller of the German Research Center for Geosciences has spent 5 years mapping these pressure networks using sensitive seismometers. He says Mediterranean coastal geology operates like a massive hydraulic system. When pressure releases in one location, neighboring areas immediately experience increased stress loads. Within 24 hours of Niskayme's collapse, monitoring stations across the Mediterranean detected subtle but measurable ground movement. Spain's Costa Brava, 3 millimeters of vertical displacement, near Tossa de Mar, French Riviera, micro-tremors in Nice's coastal district. Greek islands, ground tilting on Santorini's unstable caldera rim. Turkish coast, pressure changes in Antalya's underground aquifers. Each measurement was tiny individually, but collectively they painted a picture of geological systems responding across vast distances to Sicily's pressure release. Archives from the Vatican Library reveal that Mediterranean coastal collapses often occurred in clusters. Major landslides in Sicily frequently preceded similar events in Spain, Greece, and southern France by 1 to 3 years. Church historian Father Alessandro Benedetti has traced the pattern across 5 centuries. He says disasters that seemed random to local communities show clear coordination when viewed across the entire Mediterranean basin. It is as if the coastline has been breathing together for millennia. Modern monitoring technology reveals the scope of current instability. GPS stations across Mediterranean coastlines are recording millimeter-scale movements that indicate building geological stress. Underground water table measurements show synchronized fluctuations from Barcelona to Istanbul. Most alarming, thermal satellite data indicates that 47 coastal cities are showing the same underground heat signatures that preceded Niskayme's collapse. Research suggests that Mediterranean geological networks have a critical mass threshold, a point where simultaneous pressure releases could trigger cascading failures across multiple coastlines. Computer modelling indicates that if 8 to 10 major coastal cities experience geological failure within a 2 to 3 year window, the pressure redistribution could destabilise the entire network. Dr. Müller warns that we may be approaching that threshold. The question is whether we will recognise the warning signs before the system reaches its tipping point. Let's imagine what that tipping point might look like. It begins at sunrise on a Tuesday morning in Nice, France. Hotel guests on the Promenade des Anglais wake to what sounds like distant thunder, but the Mediterranean sky is clear. Below their luxury balconies, a 300-metre section of the famous waterfront is slowly tilting toward the sea. Within minutes, emergency sirens pierce the morning calm as the coastal road buckles and underground parking structures begin flooding with seawater. The Nice collapse is not random. Geological surveys later reveal it was triggered by pressure redistribution from Niskayme's failure 6 weeks earlier, stress that had been quietly building beneath the French Riviera's famous beaches. By 10 in the morning, seismic monitoring stations in Barcelona detect unusual ground movement along the Costa Brava. The thermal signatures match Niskayme's pattern exactly. Underground clay layers are heating up as they lose structural integrity. Emergency coordinators face an impossible choice. They must choose whether to evacuate coastal cities based on thermal satellite data that most residents do not understand, or to wait for visible signs of collapse that could arrive too late. At Tossa de Mar, a medieval fortress town perched on cliffs identical to Nishimi's geology, the mayor receives a call that changes everything. Spanish geological services detect ground movement accelerating every hour. The evacuation of 12,000 tourists begins at noon, just as underground utilities start failing. By evening, the crisis has spread to the Aegean Sea. Santorini, already unstable from volcanic activity, shows signs of additional pressure from the geological network effect. The island's cliffs, carved from the same type of marine sediments as Sicily and France, begin showing stress fractures that tourist helicopter pilots report look like giant spiderwebs across the landscape. A day after Nice's collapse, Turkey's Mediterranean coast joins the cascade. Antalya, built on cliffs overlooking some of the world's most pristine beaches, experiences ground movement that makes international headlines. The city's Roman harbour, carved from coastal cliffs 2,000 years ago, begins showing the same thermal signatures detected by satellites before previous collapses. But Antalya's crisis represents something unprecedented. A modern city of 2.5 million people built on geology that has been systematically failing across the Mediterranean for weeks. Emergency planners confront the impossible logistics of evacuating a major metropolitan area based on underground heat signatures and satellite thermal data. 2 weeks after the cascade began, tourism and economy collide as 14 Mediterranean coastal cities are under various stages of evacuation or emergency monitoring. The economic impact extends far beyond geology. The tourism industry that supports 150 million jobs around the Mediterranean faces systematic collapse as travellers avoid any coastal destination built on marine clay foundations. Most terrifying, geological modelling reveals that the pressure redistribution from 14 simultaneous coastal instabilities is approaching the critical mass threshold that could destabilise the entire Mediterranean basin. Instead of isolated 30-year cycles, the network effect could trigger synchronized collapse across coastlines that house 200 million people. Emergency coordinators across 3 continents face a question that has never been asked before. How do you evacuate an entire sea's worth of coastline when the geological foundation beneath it decides to fail all at once? So are we prepared for this scenario? The truth is, despite significant advances in monitoring technology, the region remains dangerously vulnerable. The Mediterranean now boasts the world's most sophisticated geological monitoring network. Thermal satellites update ground temperature data every 6 hours. Seismic stations measure ground movement to millimeter precision. Underground sensors track groundwater levels in real time. The European Space Agency coordinates data from 847 monitoring points across the basin. Dr. Rossi says we can tell you exactly when clay layers are heating up, how fast they are moving, and where pressure is redistributing. But we still cannot tell you whether a thermal signature means collapse in 6 hours or 6 weeks. Modern monitoring technology has created an unprecedented dilemma. Scientists can detect geological instability months before visible collapse, but they lack the precision to justify immediate evacuation. The result is a nerve-wracking period where communities know they are in danger but cannot determine the exact timeline. Nishimi's collapse provided only 8 hours of warning between thermal anomaly detection and actual cliff failure. For cities like Nice or Barcelona, which would require 48 to 72 hours for complete coastal evacuation, that timeline represents an unsolvable logistical challenge. Recent engineering surveys reveal the scope of Mediterranean coastal vulnerability. An estimated 340 coastal cities are built on marine clay foundations similar to Nishimi. Of these, 47 show active thermal signatures indicating geological stress. Most critically, 12 cities contain populations exceeding 500,000 people with evacuation routes that pass directly through geological danger zones. While individual countries have improved coastal monitoring since Nishimi, regional coordination remains fragmented. Spain, France, Italy, Greece, and Turkey operate separate geological monitoring systems with different alert protocols. During January thermal signature detections, it took 18 hours to establish coordinated monitoring protocols, time that could prove fatal during actual collapse events. Comprehensive geological risk reduction for Mediterranean coastlines would require an estimated $45 billion in infrastructure improvements. Current annual spending on coastal geological preparedness across all affected countries totals approximately $180 million. The mathematics are sobering. Mediterranean countries spend less in 25 decades than one basin-wide geological cascade would cost in a single month. And it is not just the Mediterranean sounding the alarm. Climate research reveals that coastal geological cycles are experiencing unprecedented acceleration worldwide. 30-year intervals are shortening to between 25 and 28 years as increased precipitation intensity accelerates groundwater saturation rates. Computer modelling suggests that by 2050, the cycle could compress to between 15 and 20 years, essentially doubling the frequency of coastal collapses. Niscemi's collapse has triggered geological surveys in coastal regions worldwide. Similar marine clay foundations exist beneath coastal cities, from California to Japan, from Chile to New Zealand. Early results suggest that Mediterranean-style geological networks may exist in other ocean basins, all potentially subject to climate acceleration. Research teams are now identifying geological twins, coastal cities built on nearly identical foundations to Niscemi, but located on different continents. San Francisco's Marina District, built on bay mud, shows thermal signatures remarkably similar to pre-collapse Sicily. Perhaps most disturbing, geological modelling suggests that global coastal instability may be approaching synchronized activation. As climate change intensifies precipitation patterns worldwide, coastal cities built on unstable foundations may experience coordinated periods of failure. Dr. Rossi observes that we may be witnessing the early stages of global coastal reorganization. Climate change is not just raising sea levels, it is destabilizing the geological foundations beneath coastal civilization itself. The question facing Mediterranean communities is not whether more collapses will occur, but whether modern civilization can adapt to geological cycles that operated long before cities existed. Some researchers advocate planned retreat from unstable coastlines. Others propose massive engineering projects to stabilize geological networks. Most acknowledge that the Mediterranean's geological clock will keep ticking regardless of human preferences. The only question is whether coastal civilizations will learn to live with the rhythm or continue to be surprised by it. The real question is not whether Mediterranean coastlines will continue collapsing on schedule. It is whether modern civilization is prepared to accept that some of our most cherished cities exist on geological borrowed time. What happens when ancient geological rhythms collide with modern urban populations? Can engineering triumph over geological destiny, or will coastal cities need to accept planned retreat from foundations that never forgot they used to be underwater? And most critically, if Mediterranean clay foundations are accelerating their collapse cycles due to climate change, what does that mean for coastal cities worldwide built on similar geological time bombs? Share your thoughts below. And if you want to stay ahead of the geological forces reshaping coastal civilization, subscribe to Earth Attacks, because sometimes the Earth's most dangerous secrets hide beneath our most beautiful landscapes.